Dr. Blackburn, we're now at the presentation portion of the agenda.
Yes, Mrs. Nisi, it is my understanding that this morning Dr. Deborah Pace, Associate Superintendent of Human Resources, will be making the introductions. Dr. Pace.
Good morning, members of the board, Dr. Blackburn, and the community. I appreciate this opportunity to bring forward some additional information about EDR. As you know, at our last board meeting, there were several concerns expressed and communicated, and Mrs. Nisi asked me and worked with staff to engage for an external review to see where we are, where we've been, and where we need to go in order to restore public trust, assure transparency, and protect the interests of the school district. So where have we been? This slide represents some of the different stages of our partnership with the company Crosspoint EDR. As you know, we've been in partnership with them since 2002 in order to implement, develop, modify human resources and financial management systems. As a result of that, we've looked at both system functionality and internal processes to make sure that we're able to process information strategically for effective control of our important resources. The following chart represents where we are with the EDR Crosspoint software purchase from 2013. The Human Resources Payroll module has been introduced as new code to district staff. An initial cycle of testing was completed. There were some functionality issues, and that is now back in development with the organization and the company. The employee portal is a function of the system that we will not fully utilize. We currently use our mix system for employee information and plan to continue to do that for the period of time. However, the code has been introduced, it's been tested, and we have successfully completed 3 cycles with the e-contracts portion for PSC teachers and AC teachers. We have a 4th cycle for our annual contract reappointments in the fall scheduled at this time. The financial module for the system has been fully installed as new code. We had an update as of July the 11th. With that, there have been still 38 open issues. However, none of those are level 1 or showstopper issues. The system is currently in use by some of the district users and is still working through a cycle to work out the remaining bugs before we roll it out to the schools. A part of that rollout to school is complicated by scheduling of staff, the opening of school, and making sure that that works not just for the system, but for the district in terms of keeping the workflow going. The vendor portal and the supply chain portal are still in development, and we have not yet received any of those particular portions of the code. However, the enterprise information portal has been fully received. Training was provided to district-level staff, and there are some uses that have been put into place. But I have to tell you, we kind of put this on the back burner in order to get the other modules up fully operational, and additional training is needed and has been agreed to as we move forward. The workflow engine and project tasks, again, is still in development. The student registration module is actually an addition to the agreement that was a part of the partnership effort. It was something that Crosspoint EDR wanted to add to their repertoire, worked with district staff to kind of design a system. Again, that was kind of put, however, on the back burner in order to get the finance module going and up and operational. In order to talk about where we go from here, I'd like to invite some of our external partners who were a part of the external review to present their information to the board. Here today from Wiederman Malik, the legal firm that was asked to review the contract and the payment schedule, we have Aaron Thalwitzer and Ed Kinberg from their legal team.
Thank you, Deborah. Good morning, board. My name is Aaron Thalwitzer. This is my partner, Ed Kinberg. We're attorneys at Wiederman Malik, and we were asked to review the Crosspoint EDR contract as well as the subsequent amendments and perform a preliminary investigation into the payments that were made, and to some degree the software that had been delivered or not delivered. We put two sections of if you look at the presentation, there are two sections of the total contract. The first is from the original contract, and what it says is actually kind of important. That refers to that first quote, number 1, is a section from the 2013 amendment to the original contract, and it's important because it incorporates that amendment into the original license agreement. And among many reasons why that's important is the second paragraph, which provides that, to read it, it says, promptly after receipt of the down payment of the product order price, Crosspoint will deliver to the client 1 copy of the software. And that wasn't modified in the 2013 amendment. So a plain reading of that indicates that upon receipt of the down payment, which was made, and properly made in our opinion, they should have delivered the software. It appears that did not happen. Promptly isn't really further defined, but I think under any reasonable interpretation, we're here about 2 years later, and it hasn't been completely delivered, and I think that the most reasonable reading of that is probably within 30 to 45 days, and by then it's our understanding that virtually none of the software, if any, had been delivered. Next slide. So we went through each of the payments that the district had made since the 2013 amendment and gave an opinion about each of them. The first one, the $600,000 down payment, in our opinion, was proper. That was required on execution, and it was delivered. There was no deliverable for Crosspoint EDR at that point, so that was a proper payment. The next payment, the $2,350,000 software payment on July 30th, and then the subsequent $600,000 and $700,000 payments later in 2014, in our opinion, were improper. And the reason for that is simply because the software had not been delivered. When we received invoices from Crosspoint EDR, there should have been a procedure whereby staff determined whether the software had been delivered before initiating those payments, or at least determined the degree that the software had been delivered. Again, it's our understanding that the software had not been delivered or had largely not been delivered, therefore the payment shouldn't have been made. Paragraph 4 on this slide refers to the $200,000 maintenance payments for the new software made in July of 2013 and 14. And again, because the software had either been not delivered or largely not delivered, there was nothing to maintain or very little to maintain, and it's our opinion that those payments were improper or largely improper. Paragraph 5 refers to the $360,000 maintenance payments made for the green screen software in 2013 and 14. We had the green screen software, they performed the maintenance, therefore those payments were properly made. The $280,000 partial maintenance payment, which was made in advance, was really, in our opinion, improper for 2 reasons. One, the advance itself was improper because it should have been cleared by the board, if made at all. The other reason is similar to the other maintenance payments for the new software. Again, the software had largely not been delivered, therefore the maintenance on it could not have been done and the payment should not have been made. Now, paragraph 7 provides that any future payments going forward from this time into years 3, 4, and 5 would be improper unless the software is delivered. Those payments would only be improper to the extent that the new software isn't delivered. If it's delivered, those payments would be more proper to that degree. We formed a few recommendations based on a review of the contract and what had transpired since 2013, and these are our 4 recommendations. And the first, the 2013 amendment to the contract should have been clearer. And so our first recommendation is that the district should establish a policy going forward requiring Brevard Public Schools to develop a scope of work clearly identifying each item being purchased, the amount for the item, and the date of delivery for each item. This is basically benchmarking. This is not anything unusual, and that should be developed prior to entering into negotiations on service and supply contracts. The next policy, which may have avoided some of this had it been in place, is to require legal review and approval for all contracts over a certain value, and that value would be determined by the board. The third is to establish a policy requiring invoices and proper delivery of supplies or services to be verified prior to issuing payments. Again, if that policy had been in place and followed, it's less likely that the improper payments would have been made, or at least if they had been made, the board would have been fully aware of that. The fourth recommendation is to establish a policy separating the purchasing and payment activities. It's our opinion that the office which procures products or services, or the officer, should not be the same person or persons who actually approve and make those payments. And that's really a conflict of interest policy. Next slide. So that concludes our presentation. Are there any questions?
Okay. I'm sure there are, so yeah, don't go anywhere. Karen.
Thank you. Excuse me. I agree with your recommendations. I think that they're pretty solid. They should have been in place. And when this first came about, we asked some of those questions. You know, where's the plan? Where's the deadlines? Oh, we'll get, you know, it'll be there, blah, blah, blah. And so I completely agree with that. I do have a question on how you determine that it wasn't delivered, because it's my understanding that at least some of it, in some aspect, had been delivered, that when we tested it, it wasn't functional. In addition, BPS has asked for numerous changes to what the software does, adding functionality, changing requirements, which then in turn changes deadlines, which again, because we didn't have the implementation plan thoroughly defined, it wasn't presented back to the board for those kinds of deadlines. So I'm kind of curious as to, did you include any of that into the not promptly?
Primarily, we looked at the contract itself.
Okay.
The contract provides that the software is to be delivered promptly upon receipt of the down payment. The down payment was made. The software was not delivered. The 2013 amendment, although it's certainly not clear, it does have certain dates in it and time frames for certain things, 35 days, 40 days for certain things. In our opinion, that implies that that was the time frame, or at least could have been the time frame, for the software to be delivered from the perspective of Crosspoint EDR and from the school district. Our opinion as far as what had been delivered is based on limited information.
Sure.
We didn't do an in-depth investigation, nor were we asked to. So to the extent that the software had been delivered, it's our opinion that whatever payments were made were proper. We're making certain assumptions about that, and that's clear, I think, in our report.
If I could add just a little bit to that, too. It's not unusual in the software industry for projects to kind of go sideways and not meet their dates and times. But when that started going sideways, the staff should have brought that to the board and amended the contract so that the board had knowledge of what was going on. So the contract is very clear as to what it says. If the contract wasn't what was intended, which is not unusual in the contract world or the software world, that information should have been brought to the school board, and then the school board could have amended the contract, could have amended the payment schedule, or done whatever it deemed proper in its discretion.
I agree. Thank you.
Okay. John? Oh, wait a minute. Andy was next. Okay.
No, you.
So John, then Andy, and then Miss. Okay.
I just wanted to expound. I think you hit the nail on the head with the scope of work criteria. That is obviously, and especially in technology, very important to have a scope of work. I also think that we need to have requirements obviously built in. You can't even build a scope of work unless you have the actual requirements defined before you get there. So I think that's important. In your investigation, did you have any opportunity or reason to look at licensing, specifically the licensing of the code that existed from the 2002 contract, and how that affects what this amendment did?
No, we weren't asked to look into the licensing. When we look at the contract that you have with Harris, the contract that Harris has with EDR to purchase it, in the contract they buy all the licensing, and if there's a licensing dispute or a violation of some licensing policy, then Harris is responsible for taking care of that. So it shouldn't be our issue. But licensing is a concern because this company's changed names 5 or 6 times. Much of this wasn't brought to the school board's attention. When the original Crosspoint Inc. was judicially liquidated in 2006, I couldn't find any record that the school board knew that they had been judicially liquidated and their assets purchased by Crosspoint LLC, which was under the control of the husband of the founder of Crosspoint Inc. And we can't find any records to indicate that. So that is something that the board may need to want to follow up on, but I don't think it's critical given the contract between Harris and the school board that Harris is responsible for ensuring licenses are proper.
Okay, thanks. And one last question. There's been a lot of talk about source code. Nowhere in the product order form does it mention anything about source code related to this specific environment. Did you find anything that links source code and the actual delivery of a base code to the district legally?
In the original contract, in the master agreement, there is a provision which provides that the source code to the green screen software would be held in escrow, which is typical for contracts like this. And it's our understanding that the district does own and use the source code for the green screen software. To our knowledge, I can't say with certainty whether this is true. I don't know whether we have the source code for the new software to the extent it's been developed.
It's a discussion. We have 3 items that Dr. Pace and I talked about with Harris yesterday that will be part of the ongoing discussions after today's meeting. You know, we talked about how we're going to get around the table again. That's one of the items that we're going to hash out.
Thanks. I just wanted to make sure that I didn't see it anywhere in the IPR or in the product order form, so I just want to make sure I hadn't. But
Mr. Craig, we also need to keep in mind that the product order form for 2013 incorporates the 2002 one. The 2002 one requires the soft source code to be placed in escrow and delivered to us if the company ever goes into receivership or liquidation. So as long as we're combining the 2 contracts, which is what they've done, we will have the software source code must be placed in escrows, in our opinion.
okay, thanks.
Okay.
Perfect. That's the exact question I was going to ask, is if you take into consideration the deliverables based on the previous contract, because they were linked together, I would assume you would take into consideration the source code to the same effect, because I think in the report it said there was no evidence of that, but linking the 2 together, that should give us the rights to the source code. To clarify, that's for our own use and our own development, not to sell, just only for our own use and maintenance.
If they go into liquidation or receivership, sir.
And the next question I had for you is, because it links in the previous contract, and in the previous contract it talked about deliverables, and you based proper or improper payment based on deliverables, what is your definition of software delivered? And let me say, if we issued a purchase order for a boxed software product and the vendor delivered it to our dock, that is delivered and we owe payment. Whether we install it on our systems or whether it's operational, in my opinion, is irrelevant of delivered. So, but in the case of this contract, what's your definition of delivered?
Well, the 2013 amendment.
Make sure you're talking to the microphone for the recording.
The 2013 amendment doesn't clearly define the software that's to be delivered. There's a chart which has, I think it's 7, maybe 8 different modules, which Dr. Pace described, and there's not much more than that in terms of explanation of what's going to be delivered, how, or when. So we had to sort of divine what that meant, and we did a little bit of investigation, but again, we didn't do a large amount of investigation. It was not an in-depth investigation into the underlying facts. We mostly looked at the contract itself. So I would agree if you're saying that it's not well defined, it's not. So we had to sort of use what we had there and work with that to determine whether it had been delivered. And as I said earlier, I think that the payments would become more proper as more software had been delivered. If in fact it turns out more was delivered than we understood it to be, then the payments would be more proper.
Based on our limited investigation that we had time to do, it appeared that the concept of the contract was that the software was ready to be used and could be delivered. And using there's two ways of looking at what delivered means if it's not defined in the contract. And when you come up with your requirements, you should define terms like delivered. But delivered can either be what the word means, delivered, and the common meaning of it is I hand it to you, or it could be interpreted by the custom and usage between the two parties. And since this is an ongoing contract, we could look back at the 2002 contract and see what delivered meant between the school board and the company that existed then. But we haven't been able to do that as of yet.
And I think what we should have done is clarified that deliverable is functional, project signed off, and granted there may be more modifications down the road, but that is a vague term, and so to say proper or improper, that's just a matter of perspective. But thank you for your honesty and clarity on what you can give us there. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just have one quick question on the maintenance fees. Looking at the product order 1001, the initial 2002 product order and contract, it listed maintenance fees for 2007, well, it listed 2002 through 2011, basically, with incremental increases throughout that time frame. 2011 was the last year that was identified in that contract for maintenance fees of $360,000. The second amendment was not until 2013. Did I miss something between 2011 and 2013 justifying a payment of $360,000 in 2012?
It's interesting that you raised that. We actually looked one of the last week, and it occurred to us that we weren't sure if there was a specific term for the original 2002 contract, and we looked for one, and we couldn't find a clear termination date. The software license, it's provided in there that it's perpetual, but as far as the maintenance, there's no clear term. I agree that the product order form identifies the amount and the timing of the payments for those particular years, but not for the 1 year that you just mentioned. So, no, I don't think you missed anything. We were sort of continuing along that year, I think, but it wasn't strictly provided for in the contract.
Yeah, and from a pure legal perspective, Ms. Belford, from a pure legal perspective, we have the green screen software. We were working on it. We were using it. And if they were actually maintaining it in 12 and 13 and we paid for it, I believe a court would find those payments were proper and there was an oral or constructive modification of the contract. And the law gets really difficult in that area because it's very difficult in that area. But I think those payments were okay based on the fact that we were still using it, assuming they were maintaining it. We don't personally know if they were maintaining it then. But that's our understanding.
And so just for clarification, moving forward, we are currently working on the 2013 amendment, which is tied back to the original in 2002. What is your legal interpretation of the expectation of maintenance fees at this point?
That's a problem. Because, and we noted it in our report, is the maintenance under the contract for the new software was for 2 years. The maintenance for the 360 for the old software was not defined by term. But for the last 3 years of the contract, which was actually 4 years the way they put the end date on it, but for the last 3 years of the contract, it was to be not more than $560. When you read that group as a whole, it sounds like the maintenance fee was supposed to be renegotiated after the new software was in place and operating. So we can't give you a price for it. We don't think there's a maintenance fee at all right now. And that's something that has to be negotiated, and I think that was pretty clear in the intent of it, but it's not crystal clear. From a legal perspective, it's clear. From just reading it, it's a muddle.
Okay, Karen?
In the fact that the board wants to be completely transparent, we've gotten a couple of public records request, so I've gotten a few phone calls, and so maybe you need to answer this, maybe not you, I don't know, combination of the both. How was it decided that this would be the law firm, and who hired them? Is there a written contract? How much is it? And is there any connection between any board members and your firm? And have you talked to any of the board members about this product, or any board members talked to them about this product at any time?
Are you asking me? Or
I'll be happy to respond to that. Well, first off, in terms of why...
Well, we want to be transparent, so that's why...
Sure. Oh, this surprise question. Okay.
Well, I can't tell you in advance.
I know. I understand that, Karen. Okay. At the last board meeting, we had a lot of unanswered questions, and at that board meeting, the board tasked me to use Mrs. Belford's words to protect the interests of the board and the school district. And so after listening to everything that took place and talking with Dr. Pace, the first step I thought I needed to take, given all the people that were involved with the Cross Point issue, I felt I needed to pursue outside legal counsel, because part of the negotiations at some point involved Mr. Beislein. And so it was no offense at Mr. Beislein, but I felt I needed to get a totally unbiased opinion. And so in my discussions with Dr. Pace, I said, what can I do to go with an outside legal firm and get on it right away? And so she went across the hall, and Dr. Pace, do you want to come up to the microphone? We even talked about this yesterday, and you talked with purchasing, and by law, the board can pursue outside counsel without going out for a bid, correct?
That's correct. Under statute, Mr. Parker assured me that it was okay to pursue legal services without a competitive process. As long as the invoice remains below $25,000, then it will have to go to the school board for full approval.
And so at that point, I started looking at the law firms that I knew, and I'm on the Value Assessment Board. And this particular law firm represents the Value Assessment Board. And so that was my first firm that I thought to go with. And so that was, we called them up. And because we had to act quickly, that was who we went with. And in fact, Mr. Kinsberg actually is Satellite Beach, and he is well versed in these areas. And so he joined in on the conversations. I don't know if board members want to join in. They may know him, may know these other, feel free to join in. But that is my connection with this particular law firm. I know of them because of Satellite Beach. I know of them because of the Value Assessment Board. Does that answer your question?
It wasn't for me. It was for the public.
Oh, I understand, but you asked the question. But
Yeah,
does that?
Yes.
Any other board member want to chime in?
Sure. I know both of these gentlemen for quite a long time, but there's probably a lot of attorney firms that I know many of the lawyers in. But talking to them about the software prior to this, no, we did not have any conversation about the software. I was glad to hear they were chosen, because I know Mr. Kimberg has extensive experience in government contracts, and he's perfect for analyzing this from that perspective. As a matter of transparency, no, I had no conversation with them about this prior to them being engaged.
Ms. Steve,
Prior to
you
being
wanna weigh
engaged
in?
or during the course of it, either. We haven't talked about it except for a minute or so this morning when you asked about some questions specifically about the report. So there have been no discussions, and I have known Mr. Ziegler for many, many years, and we've worked professionally on some organizations, Chamber Board of Directors, stuff like that.
Okay. John, do you want to weigh in?
No, I didn't discuss this with them, and yes, I know several attorneys at this law firm, at Perry Robinson, at numerous firms, but we didn't discuss this.
Okay.
I contacted them last week with a question about the investigation that they were doing, just as clarification, but no communication prior to them actually being hired.
And we did get a series of questions from Ms. Belford that we answered, and all the questions and the answers are in the report, but those questions were not discussed with any member of the board, and until we submitted our report, the answers had not been discussed with any member of the board.
Okay. Thank you. Harold, do you want to weigh in at all in terms of the legality of the actions I took?
No, I think you had absolutely legal right to do that, and you don't have to compete this kind of service, and I don't have any problem with what you did.
Okay. I just, given the seriousness of this and the amount of money at stake, I felt that I needed to protect the interest of the board and the taxpayers, the amount of money at stake, and I wanted to find the best people in the quickest amount of time, and that's what I did. Sure.
I will just add that once I was aware that they had been chosen to do this investigation, I had several people contact me and say that they thought that it was a very good choice because of the areas of expertise with this firm, which increased, my appreciation for the fact that they were, in fact, the ones chosen, because I do think it's kind of a specialized area in understanding all that's going on.
And I'll just add in that I'm impressed with the way that you jumped in and handled all this and got everything out in the public and transparency. And I think you did this district a good service by making sure there's all clear and getting the reports. And we're also going to, I guess, hear from RSM on their audit side. All the right steps were taken to make sure that we show the public that this is important and that we're aware and we care. So thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Any other questions? Okay, and I think, I know when I talked with you yesterday, and I know Dr. Pace, one of the things for the public is that we've been in constant conversation, and I know you're going to stay for the rest of this, but probably at the end of this, as you said, we had very short turnaround time for this because I wanted to get at least preliminary reports, but we may be continuing on and having you work with us further on this contract because it sounds like we have further work that we may need to do on it. So please stick around, and we'll see what further action the board may want to take.
Thank you. Thank you. We'd be honored to help.
Okay. Dr. Pace, round two.
As Mrs. Nisi mentioned, we also engaged RSM McGladrey to review the enterprise software process in general and to provide some additional information to the board and the community. Jennifer Murtha is here with us today along with members of her team.
Good morning. My name is Jennifer Murtha. I am with McGladrey. McGladrey is the School Board of Brevard County's outsourced internal auditors, and we did include the implementation of the system on our audit plan for 2016. After our meeting on the 26th, I was contacted by the chair to see if we could be here today and provide some analysis and benchmarking. I have with me here today Art Edwards, who's the Audit Committee Chair, has joined us, members of my team. But Jeff Britton is a director with a specific focus in IT, so he's going to talk to you a little bit. Thanks.
Good morning. So first, just wanted to say thank you, members of the board, to the community for the invitation to speak here. Probably unlike the presentation prior to this, which was obviously very objective, this is going to be a little bit more of a subjective view on the topic. As Jennifer mentioned, we were asked probably just a few weeks ago to do some initial benchmarking and help give the board as well as the communities a little bit more insight and just just kind of how these things typically go and what do they typically cost. So with kind of the limited information we had available, we certainly wanted to provide that insight, but I also want to make sure we caveat that with the right things moving forward. So just real quick, my name is Jeff Britton. I am a director within the Technology and Management Consulting practice. I am the Southeast lead for the IT strategy practice with our firm, and I typically specialize in coming in helping projects that may have some issues get on the right track and become successful. Also, as Jennifer mentioned, we've been providing services to the district for, I think, approximately 15 or 16 years, so certainly have had a presence. We're very large in terms of national presence and also very prominent as well in the state of Florida, especially with the public sector. So real quick, obviously a couple weeks ago we were requested to do a quick study around ERP implementations. Specifically, we wanted to try to look at other districts within the state of Florida. I will say, the data, the information that we would want to benchmark typically was not readily available. We did try to make several information requests to other districts, which mostly came back unsuccessful, or in terms of just did not come back. So we used what we could find pretty much in the deepest corners of the internet to dig up public records or any other headlines, announcements that came out. But I think, as we move forward and we show some of the data, I think one of the key points to realize here is this is not always apples to apples. So when we talk about costs, and I'll talk this a bit more, it includes certain things with different public entities and may not include those in others. But we still wanted to provide some insight there. The other thing to keep in mind is, every five or 6 years, and it's really every year now, technology just continually advances. It changes. The ERP market is certainly just like that. In 1999-2000, when these products were just first on the rise, they were certainly very expensive, very complex, and just obviously in its infancy. In 2005, it was very different. In 2010 and 2012, very different again. And even today, the market for ERP products is very, very different than what it looked like a couple years ago. So we tried to leverage a lot of that information to pull back, obviously, public entities within the state of Florida, as well as around the same time frame, to do at least a somewhat fair comparison. To the right, you'll see that, obviously, we took a couple of things into play, and I think it's already been pointed out previously. We're just using a total contract value of approximately $8 million, which includes the cost of the software and then the additional maintenance and support until 2018. And just, again, some basic understandings that I think have been clarified previously. So real quick, let's take a look at cost. And I know this is always a big topic on mind with many people here. In general, I think one of the questions we wanted to answer was this price fair? Was it fair for an ERP system? And we obviously couldn't just take price alone, because there's many basically components to the price of a software, to the price of a total project. So what we actually tried to do was, again, pull back public entities within the state of Florida, paying attention to at least that they're getting the HR, finance, and accounting modules within the ERP system, and then really just take the high level, what was the total either projected or budgeted cost by that entity, and then taking a look at it and making a comparison in terms of employees. And we did this because the number of employees of an organization is actually going to dramatically influence a typical cost. So it usually drives software and licensing costs. It'll drive, probably costs for support. It'll also drive project complexity in terms of time it takes to test certain modules or do a certain amount of training. So when we do actually that comparison, you'll kind of see on the graph here, Brevard actually compares very well to any of the other public entities that we looked at in the state of Florida. So, at a very high level, again, what we can say is the price for the ERP product or for an ERP product is a very fair price received. So time to implementation. Obviously, I think, between the meeting of last month as well as, today and some probably of the other, the chats that I've had with Gino and those in the IT staff, there are obviously a lot of things that could have been done better, been done differently to realize a better time frame for delivery. Typically what we see in public entities, through our research, most of the entities were budgeting approximately 2 to 3 years of implementation. In the private sector, we typically see about a 1 to 2 year time frame as an average. Some may be going a little bit over 2. But those things are usually driven by kind of 4 key factors here. The product and modules selected, obviously. Some products are more sophisticated, maybe more complex than others. And obviously, the more modules you select, the more time and complexity is going to be to have integration within those modules. The extent of change. So, products will come in out of the box. How much do those need to change? And that'll obviously drive a large amount of basically coding, development, testing, planning, and anything else. So the level of customization obviously drives that. And then obviously testing and resource training. You obviously do not want to go with modules as important as finance and HR and accounting, and obviously not train the people to use the product properly, giving them the documentation and so forth, and making sure that they're comfortable prior to cutover. So these will typically drive this, and I think from a 2013 start point, I mean, typically the district would expect to end in the 2016, possibly 2017 timeframe. That would probably be a very reasonable estimate in time to implementation. But I think what this initially says is in terms of timeline, it's obviously not an ideal situation to be in right now, but it's also not completely unheard of. Now, some of the other research that we want to provide, and again, a lot of this is subjective, but we certainly want to, I know in the last presentation from last month, they provided a couple headlines, and it doesn't take it's an easy search to do to just look at ERP failures and see that this is something that happens all the time. And it's certainly, what we see across many organizations. I think it was something like 72% of ERP projects out of a survey done by the Panorama Consulting Group took a lot longer than expected. 54% of the projects exceeded, and the cost must be in the white font there, but they exceeded cost. And you'll see kind of to the graph to the right, typically only about 1/3 of the projects really fall within the budget there. So again, the high-level message here is it's obviously not an ideal situation, but it's also not uncommon. It's not to a point where it's unfixable. It is definitely something that you can resume and make successful. And that actually concludes this. So, again, high-level topics here. I think the cost was very fair for an ERP product and the modules that you're receiving. The time for implementation, again, it's, you're coming up on a typical 2 to 3 year time frame. You certainly want to make sure that any timelines that are presented here moving forward are obviously expedited, but not to the point where it sacrifices the quality of your delivery. And then again, just in terms of the general situation, I've been speaking with my teammates, and we're kind of the same opinion that it's very important to make sure that as you take a look at where you are today, when you're looking back, the only thing you should be looking back at is not making the same mistakes again, correcting those moving forward, and getting to the place that you want to be.
Thank you. Questions? Andy.
You said you felt the cost was fair.
Yes.
I want to make sure I understand. This type of software is priced how? Based on, because you said for the number of employees. So is it based on the number of data points? Is it based on the number of users that are actually going to log in, so all the employees would log into the employee portal? What is the most driving factor in pricing this type of software?
Certainly. I think probably the biggest driving factor is actually the product that you're going to select. So probably some of the bigger names with more functionality and just more presence are certainly going to be probably more expensive than maybe your smaller products. Outside of that, though, typically what's going to drive your costs are obviously the modules that you select or that you choose to use. The number of users is typically billed as a software license, so any user who uses the system, who is part of the workflow, who has a defined role, there's a license cost associated with that. But then as far as a total project cost, again, it really just it's dependent on the scope. If you guys are doing things like defining workflows, requirements, or if they're doing that, those things are typically worked out in the initial contracts or the initial agreements. And then that determines the level of size of, from the vendor or from any other perspective, any other party, when they come in, how much work they're doing, and then how long they're doing it.
Okay, so in comparing other districts, unless you really know what modules they're purchasing, whether they purchase more functional modules or less functional modules, it's really hard. Like you said, we're not comparing apples to apples. But then also, so what I'm understanding is because there's a user license fee, if we were an organization of double the size, we could expect an increased license fee based on doubling the number of users.
That is typically...
So larger district, larger cost. So we're about over 8,000 employees, and we've got to consider that as part of the cost when determining what is a fair price. Now, as I understand it, there is a student portion of this software. We're going to actually have a parent portal. So now you multiply that by 9 to almost 72,000 people logging in. We should then consider that as whether or not that's a fair price when we're going to have 9 times the number of users. That would tell me it's even a better deal from that perspective.
Yes, and we made sure we looked at actually just the size of the organization and not necessarily the users.
Not trying to drive up our cost. I'm just trying to make
No.
a point.
And again, this is a very tricky situation. With every vendor, with every provider of this software, they're going to have different types of fees and different ways that they're going to bill certain things. I think overall, what we found is, for an ERP product that would do the things that are described, at least in high level on the contract, this is a very fair price. It's obviously now just getting what you paid for.
Anybody else? Oh, John. Sorry.
Sorry. Thank you for your explanation there. And a couple of my questions were specifically about that and how if you looked at those other products or those other counties, exactly what they purchased. Did they purchase it per employee, or did they purchase a general license, or is it per user, or whatever the case? So I think we've exhausted that. I do have a question, though, on the overall. As you said, the timeline could be fair, 2 to 3 years. I would agree with you if, in fact, we had a product. And I think that goes back to the case of, on the order form, it's a product order form, when, in fact, there never was a product. And in the industry, we call it vaporware, where you are developing a service. It is a service contract, basically, until you've developed that actual product. Because nothing actually existed. Well, if it's not true, Andy, then explain it.
The software was ran against a copy of our existing database, and we were able to, something I had looked at and sat down with, I ran through a bunch of modules and had them bring up a variety of different types of reports on our data and show different screens. Now, if they were facades, they were very, very good facades, but I did run through the software with them. So there was a functional product. Was it functional to the point that we could use it? Obviously not. Obviously staff had concerns about it, and I'm glad that they did raise those concerns if it wasn't ready. But there was a product at that point in time when we made that decision that we were able to view and look at data.
Okay. So that product never actually arrived, though. Is that true?
Whether it was installed on our servers or whether it was operating on theirs, I didn't ask that question.
Okay. So I guess I'll go back to my question. In your review, is what we received an actual standalone product, or is this a top layer that goes on top of our existing product?
So I have not had the time to do kind of a deep dive into this yet. I will say just some basic conversations with Gino. I was understanding that this was a development of a new product that was based on an old system, or on the previous system.
We might want to ask Gino.
But outside of that, I can't really say,
Okay.
I don't. What I don't know is if there was a CD or anything else that had actually media
Sure.
on it that you could go and install at the time that any payment was made, or the time they should have delivered that.
Okay. And then the last thing I'll say is you brought up a really great point at the end. To me, it's all about the forensic analysis of how we got here and how we make sure we don't do it again, right?
Right.
And that means you write airtight contracts, you start with requirements, you work through a statement of work so that if there is scope creep, that you have a mechanism in place to take care of that. Are you going to continue your analysis or your investigation to make sure that you give us an idea of how we can do that?
And Jen, I don't know if you want to comment on specifically with. I believe that that there is an audit in the plan, but I'll let you.
Included in our audit plan for 2016 is an audit of the implementation of the system. And since we've had, a lot of conversation about this today, what our preference would be, and what we will be bringing to the audit committee that ultimately comes to you, is to take from this time forward and waiting for the presentation that's going to follow us to say what is supposed to happen from today going forward, and to have our IT systems kind of walking along the way to be able to say, okay, this is what was supposed to happen, did it happen, from both an IT standpoint and from a payment standpoint. So moving forward and going forward with a very active online real-time monitoring.
Okay, thanks.
You guys good? Are you good?
I want to expand on where I think Mr. Craig was going with that, and it's going forward, what's going to happen going forward. And I just want to say, I think through all of this analysis, we've determined that that staff did as best job as they could, based on the magnitude of such a complicated product and implementation.
Yes.
Probably beyond their expertise, because it's not a field that they work in very often. Many or most organizations never really gather any expertise on this type of a process. So in hindsight, maybe we should have either contracted a consultant to guide contracts and deliverables and help with some of the project timelines, since our staff has plenty of other important things that they need to do on a day-to-day basis, or maybe we should have hired an employee to do that. I'm thinking that going forward, we should recommend that we have an expert assisting who has experience in these type of projects going forward, be it a consultant, right, whether it be a consultant who we can contract to do that, or whether it would be more beneficial to hire somebody to do that. And I would look recommendations from RSM on as to what typical guidance an organization like us would engage in to make sure these things go a little smoother and our best interest is looked into. Could you speak to that?
Why don't we still have to hear from Harris, because they're going to be a part of this and what they're going to be bringing to the table. But I don't want to gloss over the fact that mistakes were made, Andy.
And that's the point, and
Right,
I want
but
to
I
avoid
just-
them going forward.
Okay, but right, okay, and I hear what you were saying, but I heard you take, yes, staff did the best they could, but staff also made mistakes. Okay, I just want to make sure we don't separate
there were
the two
many
sentences.
mistakes in that, and I think they were due to not having knowledge or expertise in what they were engaging in, not by any ill intent at all.
No, there was no ill intent.
No ill intent. Just it was a bigger project, and some expertise would have been very helpful at the beginning. And I'm saying is, let's make sure we have that going forward.
Okay, but yeah, before we start going into what, yes, Mrs. Belford.
I didn't mean to interrupt your sentence.
No, I just said before we start going into other recommendations, I guess I want to get the third part in and what they're doing, because that's the third piece of the puzzle. And so that's why the attorneys are still staying. I know RSM's going to stick around, but going ahead.
Just at some point, I think we need to revisit the discussion of the task of the audit committee moving forward, looking only forward. So if that is more appropriately placed after Harris speaks, I certainly understand that. I just think it should be part of the conversation.
Okay. I guess I would like to bring Harris in for, well, is your concern with them only looking forward, or are you wanting them to look back?
I just feel like really in order to know what we need to do going forward, we have to know what we did wrong in the past. We have to look at the process and where our current policies failed, so that we can make sure that we are addressing that in completeness.
Okay, I guess I felt like we had that from the attorney's report. Do you not feel like we had that from the attorney's report?
My only concern is if you look at both the reports of McGladrey and of the attorneys, both have stated the fact that this was quick turnaround and that they really only did kind of a topical evaluation of what was taking place. And so my concern would be that we make sure that whatever depth we need to look at to ensure that we don't face this again in the future going forward, that we take that opportunity to look at it in depth as opposed to limiting ourselves to between two board meetings.
Okay, Jennifer? Can you incorporate that into this?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Lessons learned, best practices, those kinds of things. We'll incorporate that into our look forward.
Okay. Yeah, I don't see a problem with that. Is that good? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. Pace, round 3.
Next on our agenda are our new partners with Harris School Solutions. And here with us today is our Senior Executive Vice President, Tim Fitzgerald, and Vice President Beth Sen, to kind of share where we are and where they see us moving forward.
Okay. Welcome, Mr. Fitzgerald.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Dr. Blackburn, board, and the community, thank you very much for inviting us today to speak and to share where we are on this endeavor. So, again, my name is Tim Fitzgerald. I'm the Senior Executive Vice President for Harris School Solutions. And I thought today, I'm also here with my Vice President of Support for the Financial Solutions Group. And I'm here today really to cover a couple different things, because I know that we are new to you. We're new faces, new company, new partner. And so I thought I would cover the next 10, 15 minutes, maybe a little bit about who Harris School Solutions is. Also talk about the Crosspoint acquisition, letting you know, okay, what did we acquire, when did we acquire them, why did we acquire them? And then also talk about the Crosspoint solution as it's being deployed for Brevard Public Schools. Talk a little bit about how we got here. I know that we talked about this in the prior two sessions, so I'll try not to repeat a lot of the things that have already been said. How do we move forward? Really, that's more important to us as a new partner with Brevard Public Schools, is ensuring that we move forward in the proper direction, the proper way, using the proper resources and the proper processes. And then talk about the product timeline, because we have had an opportunity. Our Vice President of Research and Development has sat down with our Crosspoint development team to see exactly where we are with the different modules that you signed up for in the last contract, and I want to make sure we just provide you with the truth. I mean, we want to tell you where we see things right now and where we have questions. And I know we do have some conversations afterwards. I know we're going to talk about maybe the contract, pricing, things of that sort, just to make sure we're on task. But just letting you know right now, these are the things I intend to cover this morning. Okay? All right, thank you. So who is Harris School Solutions? I'm sorry. Who are we? We are actually part of a larger company called Constellation Software Incorporated. Constellation Software is a Canadian-based company based out of Toronto, Canada. It is a company that focuses really on different vertical markets for software. So they specialize in a number of different areas, whether it's utility billing to schools to security to a whole myriad of different verticals. Constellation Software is traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange, and we are actually in over 30 different countries across the world. We have more than 30,000 customers, and we are actually doing very well as far as performance goes. So I put up here, just so you know, a little bit more about Constellation. This is our performance for the past 5 years. We've gone from approximately $22 per share to over $550, roughly, and we're trending very, very well. So we're a very stable company with about $11.5 billion market cap, and we know our business. We know what to do. We know how to go in and to work with different companies and different verticals. The acquisition of Crosspoint, just so you know, is not something uncommon to us. What we do is we grow organically. We also acquire. So we acquire companies that fit our market, fit our need, and actually fit our strategy for growing our business. So that's why we have been so successful, and that's why even the acquisition of the Crosspoint assets is not something that really concerns us or scares us. We're really here to make sure that you are successful as a customer of ours. So as you can see from the chart here, this is all public information as well. This is actually on the Constellation website. So if you were to go to csisoftware.com, you would find all this information as well. But Constellation is really made up of a set of wholly owned subsidiary companies, and we are part of Harris. Okay, so you can see up on the screen right now, we are part of Harris, which is actually Harris Computer Corporation, and Harris Computer Corporation is run by 3 different regional presidents. It was actually started in 1976. And really the focus back then was utility billing solutions. That's how we got our start. In 1996, we were acquired by Constellation Software. In 2002, we had our first acquisition, successful acquisition, and we've continued to grow and also acquire where appropriate since that time. We've had 13-plus years of consistent growth and profits, and we also have more than 50 offices throughout the U.S. and Canada. So again, going to Harris, this is actually an overview of what Harris looks like. We have a lot of different verticals that we focus on at Harris, and those different verticals, those different markets are actually managed or overseen by 3 different presidents. We, Harris School Solutions, actually fall under what's called the Public Sector and Schools Group, and it is made up of about 10 to 12 different business units, and where we fit in is we are actually part of or one of those business units. So Harris itself and even the Public Sector and Schools Group does not just focus on schools. We have a lot of other areas we focus on as well, such as public safety, local government, things of that sort. Okay? And then to break it down a little bit further to let you know where we fit. So Harris School Solutions, that space that I just showed you, we actually function as 4 different business units, which I oversee. We currently have a financial as well as a nutrition, a student information, and also a continuing adult education business unit. So we focus on those 4 areas right now, and that's where we specialize. We specialize just K through 12, with exception to our specialty or specialized solutions business unit, which is fairly new to Harris School Solutions. But overall, for the majority of our business, pretty much 99% of our business is focused on just K through 12. So even the solutions that we deploy are specifically tailored to K through 12. They're not general ERP systems. They're not general payroll systems. They are tailored specifically to schools, their processes, their needs, and that's really our target. Okay, and so who is Harris School Solutions? When you look at the financial solutions group, because that's where the Crosspoint software solution is going to fall under. It's going to fall under our financial solutions group. This is our mission statement, just putting it up there so you can see exactly what we specialize in. Again, we build centralized web-based HR, payroll, and accounting systems. And the key word there is across all of North America, and it is for K through 12. Okay? The Crosspoint acquisition. So that's a little bit about Harris. I hope that explains where we fit. And also, I did fail to mention that we currently have more than 4,500 different school districts across North America right now that we work with. Okay? So we know this space very well, and we do have a variety of different financial solutions that we actually deploy to different customers based upon the region in the country. Okay? So the Crosspoint acquisition. Okay, so I guess I just wanted to answer very quickly or put out there, what did we acquire, when did we acquire them, and why? Okay, so I guess first is what? We acquire the assets. So Crosspoint LLC still exists. We purchased all of their assets. Okay, so they are now ours. We own the intellectual property. We own the code. We own everything that Crosspoint had. They no longer own it. They transferred it to us. Okay, that occurred on June 26th, which was about a month ago. And at the time, I did not envision I'd be here 25 days later in front of the board. But here we are. So that's great. And then why? I think more important is actually the whys. To be quite honest, we have a very, very small footprint in Florida. We had 3 very small schools that we've worked with. So this actually allowed us to expand our market, our K through 12 market, into the Florida market. We actually can leverage Crosspoint's strong technology. Their technology is very, very good. We go through a very thorough due diligence process. We were very familiar with their green screen product they had out, and also are familiar with the work that they've done and the work that we've now done, have done with our new product and our new solution. And our total intent is to fully mature the Crosspoint solution set and make sure we bring it to maturity. And we also want to make Brevard a showcase customer. And we know that you're a very large school district made up of a number of school districts, and we know that you are, for us, a great opportunity for us to showcase what we can do for all schools across all of Florida. And then, again, what we want to do is build upon that partnership that started in 2002, I believe. I know that it's been maybe a little rocky these past couple of years, but we want to make sure that we actually build that, rebuild that partnership with you and really truly work with you to make you successful. The solution. So I guess I know we covered a little bit about this earlier on, but I want to talk a little bit about how we got here, how we plan on moving forward, some of the things that we saw, and talk a little bit about the product timeline. Okay? So how do we get here? I think Mr. Craig actually hit the nail on the head there when he talked about requirements, that there apparently were not a whole lot of requirements. There are a couple different things that we think that were areas for improvement, right? So I think the processes are one of the first things. The processes are not as tight as we probably would run. I know they're not as tight as we would run Harris School Solutions. Our development processes are much tighter than I believe what was in place for Crosspoint. And in fact, we use an agile methodology for our development lifecycle. And so we're going to institute a lot of those processes and procedures into the Crosspoint team. In fact, like I said, the Crosspoint team is now part of Harris. So, I refer to them as Crosspoint, but really they're Harris. And they are all Harris employees. Just so you know, they all came over as Harris employees. And I'll touch upon that in a moment. But really it comes down to the issues that we look at are the processes, the requirements. As I said, Mr. Craig, I think, hit the nail on the head. The requirements were not very well documented, if at all. Where they were documented, if there was a change, I think a lot of verbal commitments made, but without a lot of writing, not a lot of documentation, not any communication to the board and or to the public to let them know what's going on. Those are really some of the key things. And as an example, if I look at the financials just alone, we went back to our development staff and we said, okay, what have we done what have we added to the product that was not in the original requirements as we understood them. We very quickly came up with 20-plus enhancements that were performed to the product that weren't documented. And aside from the financial implications, it impacts the timeline. I mean, this is an enterprise resource planning program. It's actually meant to support an enterprise. It's a very large project with a lot of moving parts. And to have changes that are done that are not documented is, quite frankly, a little concerning. So that in and of itself is just something to be aware of. There's 20-plus changes with no documentation, essentially. All word of mouth. And that may have worked for a smaller project. It doesn't work for a large project. So how do we move forward? So very quickly, I mean, it's just another way of saying what do we do differently, which I think was already asked earlier on. And so what do we think needs to be done differently is a number of things. First is new management. So I just want to make sure that you're aware that Crosspoint now falls under the Financial Solutions Group for Harris School Solutions. That Financial Solutions Group is managed by an executive vice president who reports to me. That person has 4 vice presidents under them. So they have an R&D organization, a professional services organization, support, as well as sales. The prior owner from Crosspoint, just so you're aware, just want to make sure we're very clear on this, she is with us for a very short engagement. So we kept her on board to allow us to help us transition from Crosspoint over to Harris, and that engagement will be complete by the end of this month. Okay? So aside from that person, all the other developers and support staff have come over, and they are now Harris employees. Okay? And then also, project manager. We talked about this a little bit earlier. I think Mr. Craig may have brought this up as well. The project manager. We have already gone out and started a search for a project manager. In fact, we just put an offer out to one yesterday. Somebody who's experienced. We're going to have a dedicated project manager to just this project. I think that you probably should do something similar. I know that it was mentioned by Mr. Ziegler about on your end. I think that you need one on your end as well. Those 2 project managers are what's going to keep this on track and moving forward. We're also increasing our development staff. So we've already posted positions for 2 PHP developers because we looked at the current staff and said, okay, we need a little bit of help. And so we're adding to that, and right now we're hiring 2, and we'll look at what makes sense in the future. So that's where we're in the development staff. And then formalizing the timeline. The timeline itself, as I said, I mentioned this previously, we've done an initial assessment. Our Vice President of Research and Development sat down with the Crosspoint team, looked at the contract, looked at the modules that were committed to you, and said, okay, here's what I think. Here's based on everything I know right now, and we're still digging into it. Here's what I think here's what I think the timeline is. So whatever timeline we put up there, we just want to make sure we're realistic. We want to make sure that we're honest, that we're not hiding the ball. We want to make sure that what dates we put out there we stick to. If they change, there has to be a reason. Through change management, so that the project manager from both sides is aware of, okay, if there's a change, okay, well, how's it going to impact cost, time, and pretty much the quality of the software. So we want to make sure that everything is known up front. Before a change is made, it has to be agreed to in writing. So if I look at the current state right now, I know you're a legacy customer. We are still supporting both versions. Okay, so that's why you're paying maintenance for the legacy, and also you have the web component out there as well. So we are supporting both. I know there's some question, and we can talk about this later on, about what is complete, what isn't complete, what should we be paying, what should we not be paying. But that, nonetheless, letting you know we are supporting both products, and we still have the staff on board to do that. The upgrade path. The one thing that's interesting about this upgrade path, which is different from a lot of other migrations or upgrades to a new product, is that you're getting a complete technology overhaul, but there are a lot of benefits to the way you're going about it. Okay? You're getting a web-based solution. There's no data migration. So a lot of upgrades, you have a data migration. Data migration is key. I don't know how much everybody realizes how much of a thorn in everybody's side that typically is whenever you have a large deployment or large upgrade. The migration itself, the time it takes to get that data migrated over, to validate it, to check it, to ensure that it is intact, is time-consuming and very costly. So there is no data migration here. So that's one thing to be aware of. We've overhauled the technology but left the database intact. We are also that allows you to retain the history. Also allows you to do a phased rollout. So on a Friday, for example, your end users theoretically could be using the product, the green screen product per se. When a new module is ready, it gets pushed out on a Saturday, for example, and assuming that it's gone through QA, UAT, and it's ready to use, theoretically your users could come in that Monday and just start using the product, the web-based version, not the legacy green screen. So It allows you to do that phased rollout with very minimal disruption, if at all. And then also, I guess the other thing to be aware of is by doing this, by upgrading to the web version, while you're going to an upgraded product, you can have easier user adoption. Because when you think about it, the hardest part is, teaching old dog new tricks. In this case, those old dogs are still using the same processes and procedures that are in the code or actually in the product itself. It's just that now they have a new way of getting to it. And yes, some things will change in the web. Web is different than client-server based, but it is easier from an adoption perspective. It's easier to train your current end users on the new solution, new product. So that's the current state. The timeline, just letting you know that so here are all the different modules that are promised to you in the current contract. So what we did was we looked at the current contract. We sat down with our development staff and we said, okay, when can we deliver? And so we went through financials. We know financials has been delivered, but there are some things that were identified in the user acceptance testing. So we're going to resolve those, and those we're committing to get to you, actually, if not within the next week, certainly in August of this year or next month. The Enterprise Information Portal, that is complete, except I do know that there was a request to actually add some security around that. So that's in the works, and that will be done by October 2015. The vendor portal, currently, as we look at it right now, it looks like it's going to be February of next year. Employer portal, based upon our initial assessment, is going to be March of next year. And then HR payroll. So the key to HR payroll is it was rolled out, it was complete. We got feedback from your staff saying that there were issues, and I think Mr. Ziegler mentioned this. So it's out there, it's been used. And then there was a request to change some of the processes, change the way that the screens flowed. And so we actually did that redesign for you. We're actually working on that right now. That will be complete in time. When I have July 2016 on there because that is a key date for any school. I mean, the fiscal year starts July of every year, right? So you have to ensure that you have that system up and running so you can cut payroll on July 1st without missing a beat. The time frame that's built into here will also allow you to do your parallel testing months before. Because I think there's 8 pay cycles, I believe, you have to test or maybe run a parallel, maybe a little bit more. But the team has gone back, looked at that, and said, okay, we will deliver the other modules that are necessary to ensure that we get the parallel testing in place and complete so that we're ready to go on July 1 of 2016. Okay? Now, the two last items here, and I'll be honest, these are 2 open items right now. One is supply chain, and the other is workflow engine and project tasks. We've asked around, and it goes back to, I think, what Mr. Craig said. What are the requirements? We don't know. And we've asked some staff and also some folks with the school just as to, okay, what exactly is this? And I'm not sure that anybody really knows at this point. So this is full disclosure, letting you know. We want to find out what the requirements are and what the needs are around that. So that's the timeline. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. I guess I just open it up to any questions that you may have.
Do you want?
First, could I ask that you would provide the copy of your presentation, either to Pam or to Deborah, to somebody? There was some stuff I was trying to write down frantically, but didn't get all of it there.
You'll get full copies. It's not a problem.
Excellent.
It's actually on this computer here. But
okay, wonderful. The other question I had, you mentioned that you had purchased all of CrossPoint's assets, and for the clarification of our community, where does EDR fit into those assets? Because there's been some discussion as to entity identity.
Yeah, where EDR fits into this essentially was that I guess CrossPoint initially, I think it might have been CrossPoint Inc., they were working on, I believe, an arrangement with some other partners or whatever. They created EDR. They transferred everything over to EDR, and then when they decided to pursue a different path, they then transferred everything back to CrossPoint LLC. So it's all been transferred back to CrossPoint LLC. CrossPoint owned until we purchased them, all of the assets, the source code, and everything associated with the product. CrossPoint LLC, as I said, is in existence, but they can no longer work in the schools industry. We have all their code. They can't use the code. I mean, it is ours, lock, stock, and barrel. And again, we do this all the time. So we have a team of lawyers that look at all this during the due diligence process, so we do know that, in fact, we have all the assets. Okay?
Great. And you mentioned that you work with 3, I'm not sure if it was small schools or small school districts in the state of Florida. Can you share who those are?
You know what? They escape me right now, but I can provide this to you afterwards. Not a problem at all. It just escapes me right now. And I'm not sure if my Vice President of Support may or may not know that. Do you know the names? No? Okay. Yeah, so we can get that to you afterwards. Not a problem.
And then The last thing I just want to clarify, you had mentioned that under a very short-term arrangement, the former president of CrossPoint is working for you all. Does that have a closed term on it? I mean, have you stated this is, you will no longer be involved after this date?
Yes, that's actually, there's a very specific date, and that date is this month. By the end of this month, actually I believe it's by the end of middle of next week, I believe. I think it was a 30-day. It was a short-term engagement to help pretty much just transition everything from CrossPoint over to Harris. And that person is not employed by Harris, nor is there any intent to employ that person at Harris.
Yeah, I made it very clear to the two individuals that we didn't want that person here involved in our account or anything to do from this point forward.
Okay.
And they understand that.
Anything else?
First of all, thank you very much for taking the time to come and explain all that. It was a great presentation. Can you, just for the benefit, because of folks that have been following this, explain what maintenance means to y'all?
Yeah, so essentially maintenance is the ongoing, it's what you pay for ongoing support of products that you have purchased, essentially. So maintenance is the fee that typically gets paid every year. So that, for example, if you buy product X, right? Product X is being used by your end users, and they determine that they want to call in for support, just like anybody would call in for any other help on any other system. That maintenance fee is what enables us, Harris, to provide that support to end users who are calling in with issues or questions or problems, and then resolving those issues as well. So if it's a problem or a bug with the system, depending upon the severity of the problem, whether it's a sub 1, sub 2, or sub 3. It is, okay, we provide you with a workaround while we put in place a code fix by X date, or if it's, for example, a Sev 1 or Severity 1 issue, typically those are mission critical, which means a code fix has to go out immediately, and you have to get the system back up and running as quickly as possible.
Will there be, or is there, or do you use a trouble ticket product that will allow our people to do that? Because I don't, obviously it's not in our, it's not defined here.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah, we do actually have a web-based, and actually I could have my support VP come up and talk about that, but we do actually have a CRM solution in place, and we are actually, we currently use one product right now, but we are actually migrating to another CRM solution. But there is the ability, I mean, that's how we do business, right? Whenever it is an issue, customers primarily just log into the web, or they can call us or email us or what have you. It creates a ticket. Then somebody follows up with the end user and solves the problem. And it requires a code change. Did we do the code change? If it just requires maybe walking them through an issue or a problem with the software, then it's a very quick call.
All right, thanks. I assume from your presentation that exists. I just want to make sure that we had that clarified. Thanks.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. And I know we talked briefly before, and I want to go over a few things. Because this is a CrossPoint product and CrossPoint LLC still exists, are you changing the name of the product, or?
We haven't gotten that far yet, yeah. So we have not determined that just yet.
Okay.
Like I said, the technology is very sound. And we haven't made any decision as to whether or not to change the name or what have you. But, I mean, if it makes sense, we'll do it. We're not doing it just for the sake of changing the name. Okay. In fact, as within Financial Solutions, for example, we currently have 8 different financial packages of solutions that we provide to different customers across the U.S. and Canada. We have a flagship product for Canada. Typically, the names may stay similar to what they were whenever the company that got acquired or brought into the Harris fold. Typically, the name sticks and stays with the product set, so that existing customers can relate to, okay, this is the product that I'm used to, even though it falls under the Harris family. It is still our product. So whether or not we change the name, it just depends upon whether or not there's actually a need. So.
And gathering from the history that you provided us, Harris doesn't normally buy products that don't have value. Is that correct?
We never buy products that don't have value.
So you saw something in this product, and maybe even the relationship between Brevard County? Did you see some value in our relationship that we had?
Oh, absolutely. And as I said earlier, I think that we don't buy companies just to buy companies. We look at every company and make sure that there's actually one. It's got to be financially sound. We have to have a return on investment, right? But also we look at this as an opportunity to really increase our footprint in Florida, because we really had a very minimal, if at all, very almost non-existent footprint in Florida, and we saw this as a great opportunity to come into Florida. The technology is very good. I mean, I know that there's some questions today about completeness and things of that sort, but the product in and of itself is a very good product technically. And so we saw the technology. We also saw that the relationship that we can forge. The partnership essentially that started in 2002 was, from what I understand, a very good partnership up until maybe probably the past couple of years. So we started hitting rocky roads, what have you. We're here to make sure that we actually mend that fence and move forward. And our goal really is to make sure that you're successful because, as I said before, we want you to be a showcase customer for us across Florida and show others, hey, here's what we can do. So.
And that would work for us. Do we continue to keep the software?
Do you continue to keep the software?
The code?
Yeah, we just have to look at the agreement. Whatever's in the agreement is, I mean, I can't answer legal questions right now because I have to sit down and go through. And we have to, to figure out what's in the agreement or not. But if it's in the agreement, then yeah, we're not changing the agreement on you.
Because some of the things that we do here are different than what other companies do. So, like, we may not want every end user to delete things. We want only our super users to delete things. And so those are the kinds of changes that we make internally from your product, and we want to be able to take the product and to continue to hone it to what our processes are. And we just want to make sure that we're going to continue to do that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, whatever's in the agreement is what we're going to live by, and I know that we got to maybe address it afterwards or talk about that. That's one of the discussion points we mentioned earlier, and so we can address it at that time. We're not looking to take anything away from you that you already had. If it's in the agreement, like I said, we want to make sure that it's in the agreement. We assumed we purchased all the assets and then the agreement that goes along with that.
And I completely agree with you. You need a project manager, and we need a project manager.
Yep.
So we need to have somebody. Right now, the way it's working is, finance, Ms. Preston, Ms. Pace, Buto, everybody is a part of it. You have 5 people making the decisions. We need one person. They can make all decisions for each of their organizations or departments, but we need a project manager internally to work with your project manager to keep us on task.
Yeah, you need a central point of contact. Really, that's it. Just to make sure that you have somebody minding the store and watching. Okay, are we hitting all the milestones that we've set? Are the deliverables there? Are things being signed off on? When you saw my example with just financials alone, there are 20 plus different enhancements or modifications to the product where there's no documentation. Those types of things impact, like I said, not just cost, it's also time. So I'm not quite sure. I know that it was significant. I didn't want to necessarily put it up there because I did have an estimate of hours, but that wasn't the point. Just letting you know that I know it did delay your product significantly, just even adding those 20 enhancements. So.
And the July 11th finance implementation, what do you know about it and its success from your perspective?
Yeah, so what I know right now is that code went out on time. It was actually tested. It actually went very well, except that I know there are some issues, I believe 30-plus bugs, which is not unusual. They're very small, very minor, and as I said, our plan is to have that pushed out to you, the fixes, essentially, I think within the week, but I put on the calendar August because I wasn't sure. I know we're at the very end of the month, but I do know that they're due to come out here any day, actually. But as I said in the presentation, August 2015 is when we're committing to. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming here and giving us a presentation. I look forward to looking at it again because I'm with you. I couldn't take it all in the first time.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Well, I just want to say first thank you. I know when we met last month, this would be the last place you expected to be here, but I want to say both you and Beth have been nothing but responsive. I have sent numerous text messages and called you, and nobody travels more than you do. This man is either getting on a plane or getting off a plane every time I talk with him, and you've been very reachable, very open and honest. Our next steps from here is that we're going to schedule a meeting between Harris and our staff and legal parties on both sides, and we're going to hammer out a very thorough agreement this time and know what the milestones, the benchmarks, what you're going to do, what we're going to do, and that will be our next step from here. And so from there we will go.
And then it would come to the board for approval?
And then it would come to the board for approval, absolutely. Everything open, honest, transparent, and very clear on where we go from here. So any more questions or comments from the board?
I think it might be worthwhile while this is happening until we put a project manager in place to also get some consulting assistance from Jeff Britton from RSM to help guide us in what we need to do, whether we have an internal person who can take the helm, whether we need a contractor, whether we need to hire somebody.
You don't think somebody from Mr. Buto's office could do that?
Maybe. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. And Mr. Buto will chime in on that. I don't know what the talent set is relevant to this type of software.
Well, why don't we let Deborah talk with Mr. Buto and kind of have some, and Dr. Blackburn, why don't we let them decide what we need to do from this point forward from a staff perspective? That would be my recommendation. So, okay, Dr. Pace, do you want to wrap us up?
I think you did a great job with that, Mrs. Nisi. I know that yesterday when we met with the group, we identified 3 specific areas for additional follow-up and discussions, as you said, between the two parties and legal sides on both of those. Those were the project timeline and those very defined deliverables and requirements for the remaining modules that are a little unknown at this point in time, as well as discussing future payments, what the contractual agreement requires the district to do, the expectations from Harris, and again, they've indicated they would honor that contractual agreement, but we have to make sure we all understand what those defined agreements really are. And then finally, to clarify, as Mr. Craig has brought up, where we stand with the source code. What is that agreement that goes back to 2002 that we would want to continue so that we can continue our work and move forward from here? So thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Outstanding presentations. Anyone need a break before we go into public comment?
I would like to talk to some of these people before they leave. When are they leaving?
Probably. That's why I was asking if you wanted a break.
I want a break.
Okay. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and we will return for public comment.